Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our second coordination call to discuss the devastation in Louisiana and Texas following Hurricane Laura. Even though news reports have subsided, the devastation of this historic hurricane remains significant, and recovery is extremely challenging. More than 120,000 homes and businesses are still without power, and more than 14,000 residents in 6 parishes still have no running water or are under a boil advisory. Additionally, the number of people in emergency shelters continue to rise as the region undergoes a heat wave in the midst of sustained power and water outages. Today, we will hear from the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development, as well as nonprofit partners who are on the ground and supporting the recovery efforts. I'm Brooks Nelson, and I lead the Community Resilience and Disaster Response Program at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. We have a full agenda for today's call, but we will have time at the end open for questions. Please submit your questions throughout the call by entering them into the questions box. Even though today's call will not focus on the historic wildfires blazing in Oregon and California, we are collaborating with CAL FIRE and Cal OES. And if you are looking to learn more about their needs, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself at bnelson@uschamber.com. Before we begin, I do want to thank the companies who have made this call possible through their support of the Chamber Foundation's Community Resilience and Disaster Response Program. They include Coca-Cola and the Disaster Action Alliance, FedEx, the Medtronic Foundation, Prudential, Shell Oil Company, and the UPS Foundation. So to begin today's call, I would like to welcome the Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. Dr. Wilson, thank you for taking time to join us today. I know you've been on a number of tours of the region with the governor, including one right now, and have been working tirelessly on the recovery. So Dr. Wilson, have you been able to join us on the line? Not hearing from the secretary, we do have Deputy Secretary Eric Cavaloda on the line to report on his behalf. So Deputy Secretary, thank you so much for being here, and I'll kick it over to you, and then if Dr. Wilson joins, we can definitely turn to him as well.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and as Brooks was mentioning earlier, it was a devastating storm, Category 4 for people who may not be from this area of the country. It was mostly a wind event. The storm surge, while it was devastating on the coastline, it did not move as far inland as was predicted. So we did not have as much flooding as we thought there would be, but the winds were simply devastating, and it just smashed the power grid. And unfortunately, the heat since that time has been oppressive. There's been a number of heat advisories, and there's virtually no breeze. So with no power, no breeze, and extreme heat, it's just the people there in absolute misery that have tried to remain in their homes. For the Department of Transportation Development, we have cleared debris from almost 3,000 shoulder miles. Each direction is counted separately. We moved down one side of the road and then up the other side of the road. So we've cleared nearly 3,000 shoulder miles of debris have been removed. That totals over 200,000 cubic yards. There's been 131,000 people have registered with FEMA for individual assistance. By Saturday, the Corps of Engineers should be tarping 400 roofs per day in the affected region. The fire marshal, Louisiana's fire marshal, has conducted over 24,000 buildings they've gone into looking in search and rescue operations, looking for people. We have 18 debris sites that have been established in Calcasieu Parish and 8 in Cameron Parish. The Red Cross has 30 feeding sites in 21 cities. As was mentioned earlier, there's about 120,000 people that still don't have any electricity. And right now we've got our Department of Child and Family Services has 17,600 people that are seeking shelter. Many of them are housed in hotels at this time, almost 13,000 in hotels. The rest are in shelters. One of our biggest issues is damage to our signs. We think there's 40 to 50,000 signs that are going to have to be replaced in our District 7. We have our state broken up into 9 different department districts, and District 7 is in the southwestern corner of the state. So we've got 40 to 50,000 signs that are were removed by the winds and or flattened, and so our first priority is to get the sign replacements in based on safety risk, being stop signs and yield signs and things like that have to go up first. We'll worry about the other signs later. We've got 85% of those back up, and we're working through the rest of them, and our total estimate on those damages is about $3 million just in signs. We've completed inspections on road and bridges, approximately 5,000 miles of roadway we've gone through and looked at, and almost 900 bridges that we've examined for damage. And so we've done damage assessments on that, and we still have some locations where we're looking at guardrail that may need to be repaired or replaced. We've got a few bridges left that we still need to look at as well, and we're looking at excluding signs and traffic signals was another big area of damage. We're trying to replace those, get those traffic signals back up and ready whenever power is available for them. We are running a number of them off generators right now. But our road and bridge damage, we're looking at over $7 million in damage just to the road and bridge infrastructure. We do have a ferry down in the lower part of Cameron Parish, and we're hoping to have that operational fairly soon, within a few weeks. And so hopefully we can have that back open, because the drive around the Calcasieu River to get to the next crossing point is about 125 miles. So it's a long way around. So if we can get that ferry back up and running across the mouth of the Calcasieu River, that will be a big help. We are having some traffic congestion issues now, because there's of the workers that are having to commute into the area. There's no place to stay, obviously, so they're having to go elsewhere to sleep and to eat and rest and such. And so there is quite a bit of congestion between Lafayette and Lake Charles right now on Interstate 10, just from the workers commuting back and forth, trying to aid in the recovery. All of our roads have been cleared of debris, so they're all open to traffic, except a few locations where there's still power lines mixed in with the debris, and we can't clear those until we get okay from the utility companies to do that. So, but other than that, all of the state highways are open. Now, there may be a number of local roads that are still closed, which have not been cleared yet, and that local governments are addressing that issue. And with that, that's about all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Calavoda. Has the secretary been able to gain audio? All right. All right, well, thank you again for joining us today and for that report out. The Chamber Foundation has been supporting local businesses and chambers in the parishes affected, and we've heard from a number of them who have called into our disaster help desk for business. If there are any businesses or chambers on this call who do need assistance, please call the help desk at 188-MyBizHelp. That's 188-692-4943. One family-owned and operated business owner who recently called in had 2 businesses impacted: a shrimping company, which had one of their boats destroyed, and a fish market, which also sustained significant damage to their building. Additionally, they experienced flooding and damages to their home. This is just one example of the impact the local economy is facing in Southwest Louisiana. Before we start our conversation with our esteemed nonprofit partners, I'd like to quickly share a video produced by Team Rubicon and will hopefully set the stage for our panel conversation. Within hours of Hurricane Laura making landfall, Team Rubicon had volunteers on the ground working to clear roadways to help first responders. Today, Team Rubicon volunteers are coordinating with local and state emergency response officials to assist communities in Louisiana as well as Orange County, Texas, in recovering from the storm. Here's their account.
Every day I wake up with a new sense of despair. And I know I shouldn't feel that way. I should be thankful that I'm alive. Because my family and I rode that storm out in my house. It was a Cat 4 when she came on shore. And we're alive to tell this tale.
The morning after Hurricane Laura, we were clearing routes for Parish Public Works. We were working just a block north of this home and noticed a few folks come to see what the team was doing.
Nobody else came that day. We kept waiting all day, all day, all day. Somebody's gonna come by. Where's all the people? Where's all the help? Nobody but you guys.
This Category 4 storm was a devastating storm that impacted tens of thousands of our neighbors in Louisiana and Texas. Because of everything else that's happening across the country, the attention has moved on from this event, and that means that these people are on the verge of being forgotten.
We came over, we cleared the access route for the family so they could get their vehicle in and out, only to find that a tree damaged the vehicle and they couldn't get it started. So we checked on them, we made sure they had what they needed for that day and the coming days. We came back today to see how they were doing.
So I have one question for you. Where the hell is everybody?
Now, these people, more than anybody, they need hope. And no organization, I think, is finer in helping out in a situation like this than Team Rubicon. And we will match donations for this particular cause up to $2 million.
We need to get as much support as we can into the communities of Southwest Louisiana and Southeast Texas to make sure that we can help them recover from this event.
The real heroes of this are the people that have yet to step up and do. And when you do, God bless you.
The U.S. Chamber Foundation has a resource page on our website with links to the organizations who are responding to Hurricane Laura. So if you'd like to learn more about Team Rubicon or any of our next speakers, you can find more information from them. The proceeds from the $2 million challenge shown at the end of the video provides Team Rubicon the ability to continue to serve hundreds and thousands of Louisiana residents who are still without water, power, or access to their home. Team Rubicon is an example of a number of the organizations currently deployed. And before we go to our panel, I think Secretary Wilson may have just joined. Secretary?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And I was actually listening to Eric, who did a phenomenal job covering for me. The one thing I would want to stress, in addition to what Eric mentioned, is we've actually established a new system for citizens and businesses to identify exactly where we are with debris. Of all of the things that can be frustrating, the Department of Transportation realizes getting signs and signals back up will add a little sense of order. But more importantly, the community needs to thrive economically and get back to business. And a number of folks have often asked, when am I going to have my neighborhood cleaned up and when will I get material out? And I think the most important thing is to know that we're doing multiple passes. And if you go to 511la.org, you see a dashboard that referenced the total numbers that Eric shared with you in terms of picking up 205,000 cubic yards of debris and doing so over nearly 2,800 shoulder miles. But you can actually go into the specific parishes and look at routes and see where we've done first pass, second pass, and potentially a third pass at the appropriate time. And so, for example, as of yesterday, we had picked up 48,000 cubic yards specifically in Calcasieu, and that represented about 37% of the area that we need to pick up in. Now, that difference between the 37 and 100%, some of those roads will not have debris on it, but it really is a good indicator that folks can have an idea of when we're going to be in their neighborhood, when we have passed, and when we've been completed. The last thing I'll tell you, and not overstay my welcome in time that's been allotted, is that we have been in every parish that's been impacted for the most part. And today we're in Allen Parish. We just left Vernon, and we'll be going down to Cameron Parish. And we have been all hands on deck with thousands of people still evacuated, pets still evacuated, providing convenience runs, healthcare runs for folks to go to dialysis and other services. We're excited to do these things, and this is something that we've just gotten extremely good at, I think, unfortunately, because of the number of disasters. And I would echo what Mayor Hunter said and others about the importance of ensuring that the country doesn't forget about this community and doesn't forget about the value this plays in terms of our multimodal exports and the chemical manufacturing that takes place. And that we look forward to trying to get as much support as we can, not just from the government, but from private sector to look to invest here and look to build this area up because of the economy and what we can bring and the impact here, because this storm could have been much worse. We think it was the worst to come on landfall since 1856. And we're excited to have partners like the Chamber, local governments, all of the nonprofits that will be presenting today, and others have really wrapped their arms around Lake Charles all across Louisiana. And I apologize again for not being able to join you, but Eric did a phenomenal job, and I was happy to just come and share a little bit. And then finally, my last recommendation or comment is to thank the U.S. Chamber for their advocacy and support for infrastructure writ large, not just in terms of being progressive and thinking about going forward, but also in this situation of responding and keeping people connected. So as a partner of yours here in Louisiana, thank you. And I want to thank Monique for giving us the opportunity to be a part of this call.
Thank you so much, Secretary Wilson. We appreciate it. And with that, we will turn to our panel discussion. And so joining me today, we have April Wood, who's the Senior Director of External Program Services and Director Disaster Operations at the American Red Cross. Mike Manning, who's the President and CEO of the Baton Rouge Food Bank, and also currently serves as the President of the Louisiana VOAD. Dana Reed, who's the Head of Government Affairs and VOAD Relationships at Operation Barbecue Relief. And finally, Zach Rosenberg, President and co-founder of SBP. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for all that you are doing and will continue to do for those parishes and in Texas. So I'd like to start by hearing from each of you about the role your organizations are currently playing in the response to Hurricane Laura, and paint the picture for our audience today. So April, I'll start with you.
Great, thank you, Brooks. So on the ground right now, we have more than 1,700 trained disaster workers from the Red Cross supporting on the ground and virtually for the Hurricane Laura response. We're really focused on predominantly supporting approximately 20,000 hotel evacuees and non-congregate sheltering across the state, as well as supporting some of the service delivery sites mentioned earlier by the Secretary across the state as well, to ensure that people have food, water, and the emergency supplies that they need. We're also conducting detailed damage assessments of more than 40,000 assessments at this point to better understand the detailed damage that has occurred for major and destroyed and minor and affected homes across the area, but really ensuring that we're, COVID has not changed our mission at this point, but we're certainly providing the same services and just maybe doing so a little different way as we adapt to make sure that our clients and our volunteers are supported and kept safe as possible during this environment. Thanks, Brooks.
Thank you, April. And Mike, if I could go to you from the Louisiana VOAD perspective, but also Food Bank, to share your thoughts.
Thank you, Brooks. It's I'm wearing multiple hats in this response, which is a little unusual. I'm, from a food banking perspective, food banks are here on the ground before, during, and after every event. So we're part of the prep, we're part of the recovery, and then we're part of long-term recovery, trying to make sure that people are fed. From the voluntary organization active in disaster perspective, we are that coordinating body that helps bring the national resources from the national member organizations, such as Team Rubicon and Red Cross and SBP, together to really make a difference in enhancing each other's work by coordinating, collaborating, and focusing such that we're not trying to duplicate each other's efforts. And one of the big things, of course, for the food banks and with the Red Cross and other feeding organizations like Operation Barbecue is making sure that we're not going to the same place so that we can spread the resources, that limited though they are, and get them where the needs are. And that's the biggest focus for us, is helping to coordinate the overall response to make it as effective and efficient with the limited resources that are available.
No, that's great. And speaking of food, Dana with Operation Barbecue, are you able to respond?
I am. Feverishly working on my webcam.
No worries, we can hear you great.
Excellent, excellent. So if I happen to pop up, we figured that out. So yeah, we've been on the ground for about, we're up to about day 8 to the tune of 217,000 meals total. That's between mostly for Lake Charles, but we did have a site set up over in Beaumont, which we wrapped up Sunday after lunch. We plan on being there through next week up to the 18th as well, providing mass care and feeding. And again, a lot of our right now, our limiting factors, as with a lot of organizations on the ground, is accessibility to volunteers. So
that's great. And we'll get into some of those gaps as well. Zach, would love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure, Brooks, thanks for having me. So SBP exists to reduce the time between disaster and recovery across the country. We are a long-term recovery organization. So while we are on the ground early, and we're on the ground in Lake Charles and in Texas, we will be there until the recovery is complete. And that relates to rebuilding homes. As of now on the ground, we are tarping and doing debris removal. We are, but our theory isn't just build and do. We want to fortify people against the breaking point. And so that means some behavioral change and some upstream solutions. We are sharing through webinars and direct trainings, emails, otherwise, helping folks navigate FEMA, maximize insurance where they have it, avoid contractor fraud, and that whole truth about mold thing. We are pushing some innovations in the government space that we believe will expedite the recovery, such as FEMA hopefully using some of the technology that the insurance companies use now to create damage assessments, and I'll talk about that in a minute later. Ideally creating a one app so disaster survivors can request help, whether it's the federal government through federal help once instead of 3 times, and then advising ideally the state of Louisiana on how to access and get the federal money out the door as expeditiously as possible. So that's what we're doing.
That's great. And Dana already alluded to this, and Mike, you did as well. And maybe Mike, you can share from the Louisiana VOAD perspective. But have there already been gaps identified, especially in critical resources needed right now in the immediate recovery or immediate response?
Well, the biggest thing is volunteers and being able to get them there to help. We're asking the voluntary organizations to be self-sustaining. We've had to because there was no sewerage, no water, and no power. So if you went in, you were pretty much on your own. So that's why, as the Deputy Secretary mentioned earlier, the traffic is so bad. And we're hearing a lot of anecdotal that it's both ways, going to and from Texas and to and from Lafayette. Just because of the volume of people who are trying to get back, who are trying to help. So it's really a challenge. You're talking about such a wide swath of the state also, which is so different than what we normally see with a Category 4, the strongest storm to ever hit Louisiana, and it's still being a hurricane well into North Louisiana. That expanded that path of destruction significantly more than we normally experience, and at levels that some parts of the state have not really experienced for years.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I know our good friends at Good 360 have also been mapping out some of the in-kind donations that are needed. And April would love to hear Red Cross perspective, some of the critical needs that you all are seeing.
Yeah, so from the Red Cross perspective, it really boils down to two things for us: financial support and volunteers on our end. We're estimating this response cost to be more than $20 million at this point. We've raised about 12 million, and so the financial support is critical to make sure that people get what they need when they need it. And then, of course, having the volunteers there to deliver those services is also critical.
That's great. And Dana, I'm guessing you would echo that on the volunteer front.
Absolutely, and as well as the financial. Currently, we raised about a little over $100,000 through crowdsource funding, private donations. That does not take into account the in-kind donations from our partners and sponsors that always have our back during these responses. But we're looking at, we've already done over 200,000 meals. I would say by the end of next week, we'll be well close to 500,000. Our cost on each one of those meals are about $450 each. And we're committed to it. We're going to do it, but always financial support and volunteer, which is even more valuable asset than the money.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Zach, anything to echo on the assessments SVP has already been doing?
Sure, thanks. So as we see it, the biggest critical gap right now is the amount of folks who are under or uninsured. So Governor Bell Edwards has indicated that he believes that 50% of the population is under or uninsured. And so what that tells us about the population is these are elderly folks, these are folks on fixed income, these are extremely low income folks. And so we are enormous fans of all the groups that are doing the immediate response, the food, the shelter, the safety. For the long-term recovery, there has to be a solution. And so we are focusing on our end, what can be done to get these people back into their homes or new resilient homes, and to ensure that the communities are able to thrive again. There is an initial charitable raise, and we can send you guys if it's helpful. There's a great relay race video that we made around the various funding sources for disaster recovery. Right now, this disaster has just raised less than most other comparable disasters, struggling. So there is a philanthropic raise that has to happen. There is a necessity to capture as many FEMA resources for the local community as possible. FEMA's done an amazing job this year. So they have already gotten, this is a huge win. I'm sure there's some FEMA people out there, I can't see you, but I take my hat off to you. You've gotten to, I think it's 35,000 people. It's amazing. Early, 2 weeks in. That's more than Michael after months and months and months. The concern, however, is that the average FEMA payout is a little bit less than half that it was in response to Michael. So we got to get that number up as expeditiously as possible. And earlier on, I asked Mike, what gives you hope, man? And he said, the people of this part of Louisiana, they'll do it themselves. The problem is they're gonna kind of chop themselves off at the knees a little bit by saying someone else needs it worse, yeah, I can live in my house and there's no roof on the house. And so we've got to find a way, and SBP has primers to help folks self-advocate navigating FEMA, and we're hoping that the flyover technology will be used, same exact thing that the insurance industry uses. So charitable fund money to help those who are going to fall through the cracks, need somewhere to live right away, got to rebuild their house right away. FEMA dollars to get to scale. And then when the HUD dollars get there, there has to be deep intentionality in getting the dollars out the door as fast as possible. Those are the gaps, Brooks, that we see.
Absolutely. No, thank you. That's great. And thinking, I think we're worried about the food, water, shelter right now, but also thinking about during this time of COVID and kids aren't in school and accessibility, power is out. What does internet accessibility or connectivity look like for these residents, whether in the shelters or who have remained in their home that still need to be repaired? Do you have any insights on that?
It's virtually non-existent other than in the non-congregate shelters where people have access through hotels and other things. But it's the real challenge, and I think Zach spoke to it, is what's long-term recovery going to look like? We're already having trouble raising funds for the responses for the organizations trying to help. And we've had such response from COVID and the demands that have been placed on organizations by COVID, and the philanthropic community has stepped up. But then the impact on the economy and that fact is going to be a hindrance to the long-term recovery and the funds available to help people try to recover from an event like this when we're already having problems covering the initial response and the initial.
Yeah, that's a great point. April, anything you want to add to that? Looked like you were.
Just on the connectivity piece, that most of the non-congregate shelter residents do have access to connectivity. It's more being out in the field if you're trying to do repairs to your home or otherwise in some of the damaged areas. And I know a lot of the telecom companies have been working really hard around the clock with teams in the field, trying to get as much connectivity as possible and ensure that people have access to charging stations or other things that they may need in the environment they're operating in.
That's great. Dana, I know you and Red Cross and others have been on the road a lot lately between the wildfires and the derecho in Iowa and Louisiana, and not sure if you all were there for Rita as well, Mike. I think you sounds like you may have been, but just curious to know, how has the response to this disaster differed from some of the previous disasters that you responded to, either this year or in previous years? Dana, do you want to take that first? Dana, are you still on? You may be muted. All right, anyone else want to take that question?
Hey, sure. I go back to Katrina. That was my first nonprofit experience with, we all have personal experience from living in Louisiana with storms prior to that, but Katrina was the first one, and then Rita right after, hitting the same part of the state that was devastated by Laura. The scale of this event compared to that, it's so much more significant from the standpoint of the breadth of the state that was hit as it went more north and created more damage. We're just fortunate that it jogged east and didn't bring all the flooding water with it, and those stayed into a less significant impact of the state on the state because of where the water surge came. Even though it was 15 to 17 feet in spots, it came at the right place to prevent the significant flooding that we would have faced. But it's really just the significance of the response and the lack of the ability of the philanthropic community to respond. It's totally different because of COVID, because of so many other demands going on, so many storms over recent years. That's the real challenge, is the ability for organizations to be able to, for our perspective, food banks to be able to get food to distribute, and then to be able to afford the distribution.
Yeah, from the Red Cross perspective, there's a couple of areas for us. So certainly COVID is one, with having the non-congregate sheltering piece and all of those wraparound support services, being able to provide feeding and health and mental health and spiritual care support to those evacuees. Just because they're not in a congregate shelter, we still want to make sure they have access to all the same resources and services that they would otherwise. Certainly being able to, seeing the coordination and the collaboration, and over time how we've leveraged technology is a big win for us in the disaster sector. I think the collaboration is just unprecedented, in my opinion, across the board, whether we're using the technology to really drive data-driven decision making and have those insights we need as organizations to really avoid duplication, minimize the duplication whenever possible, and maximize all of the resources that we have available to us.
Great. Zach, you want to touch on that? I know you started with Katrina and have been responding to a lot of disasters since. So
yeah, so it's an interesting time in our country, and I guess that's the understatement of the year. What I think all of us in this work have seen, that one of America's greatest strengths is that we care about each other. All of these groups have volunteers who come from across the country, who ask no political litmus test about the people they're going to serve, and they show up and they help and they serve, and they're all in with their body and their hearts and their souls. And so for months now, we've been told the best way to protect each other is to stay away. Now, SPP and some other groups have developed protocols for safety. Zurich and farmers have been incredibly helpful, as UPS, and us think through. And so we are using volunteers in certain areas again. There is this pent-up desire for Americans to help each other again. America needs some healing, there's no doubt about it. And intellectual healing only goes so far. Kinesthetic, tactile healing will make our country stronger, but we have to do it in a very safe way. I know SPP and all the groups are doing that. We also believe, however, that necessity is the mother of invention, right? Things are going to be, we're going to evolve because we have to. Frederick Douglass said, where there is no struggle, there is no progress. We got to have some progress right now, so we're going to struggle to do things new ways. What I'm happy to say for SPP is we're still nationally on target to meet our rebuilding goal at or under budget, 520 something houses. We're using subcontractors far more than ever before, but we found a way to do it very efficiently. And so I'm hopeful that in Southeast Louisiana and Texas, we're going to find a way to meet a couple of the country's needs. People want to work. People need the income. And so we're committed to not just using volunteers, but creating earning opportunities at fair wages for local tradespeople. It brings dignity, it brings sense of purpose, it brings the economy. And frankly, families have to be in their homes. Home means so much more now. I know within, 21 minutes, my son's going to be back in the house, and it's everything. It's school, it's a place for faith, it's a place for therapy and shelter and gymnasium. So we got to get these people back in their homes by any means necessary, as safely, as fast as possible.
No, very, very, very true. And Dana, I think we have you back on now. I'm not sure if you heard the question, but wondering how the response to this disaster has differed from some of the previous disasters you worked, especially knowing how busy Operation Barbecue's been this year.
It's definitely, we felt the impact as most organizations with the COVID constraints. It really has, we put in some pretty solid protocols to protect our volunteers. A big difference is the accommodations and trying to find a place for volunteers to lay their head at night. We struggled with that before, and even more so now, with the generous support of the Lowe's Foundation with a bunk trailer. We went and also got a second one as well. So it gives us 20 beds that safely allows our volunteers to rest at night and to get away from the site. But it's difficult. It's difficult. We have to be mindful of scaling back how many meals we do a day, just in case there is a COVID positive or one of the volunteers becomes sick, presumed COVID positive, as we call it. It would cause us to shut down the site, and we wouldn't be able to do as Zach says, get these get these families back and get them back to some normalcy. And we do that through one hot meal every time we deliver that. So we have to be mindful of that. And the pandemic has certainly changed the way we think. And I don't think we're going to be able to shift gears and do a 180. I think this is the norm for our deployments moving forward. So.
Yeah, staying on the topic of sort of the impacts of COVID and disaster response, one question that's come in is how are you all communicating with those that have been impacted on the ground? You know, with social distancing and everything else in place. I know you've all said you've put different practices in place, but how are you being there to reach those who are directly affected?
Brooks, this is April for the Red Cross. You know, we're using the model cover, distance, clean. So we are asking all of our volunteers to wear a face covering and maintain that physical distance, but ensuring that we're still providing the same compassion and hope to all of the people that we're interacting with, whether it's delivering a hot meal to one of the evacuees in a hotel or whether it's handing out a bottle of water at one of the service delivery sites. We're still focused on the humanitarian mission of alleviating suffering, and we're just doing it wearing a face covering with a smile behind it.
Yeah, from the food bank perspective, Brooks, it's really, we've been doing COVID distributions and we've gone really mobile as opposed to people coming into pantries to receive assistance. So for us, this is just you know, an expansion of what has become our existing program of distribution in a different location with people with different needs. And normally, you know, basically food banks deal with the disaster of hunger for people on a daily basis. And all we do now is we deal with the disaster of hunger for more people on a daily basis. So our operations, because we've already made the COVID adjustments, have been very easy to adapt, and we just expand the number that we're distributing. It's been great for us having been through COVID because we're already pod ready with appropriate distancing and everything in place.
So for SPP, while our team is on the ground and we believe in science and they're wearing masks and social distancing, we're also leveraging technology more than ever before to take in clients. We're using the tried and true crisis cleanup, which is getting better and better and better, and it's working awfully well. We have an email hotline, and we're leveraging Facebook groups as well. So technology is being forced to be an asset to connect with folks. But we are in the field and we believe we're doing it safely.
That's great. So just a reminder for everyone on the call, please do continue to input your questions in the question box. We do still have Dr. Calavata on and can answer any questions from the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. But before we open it up fully to questions, just kind of one last question for the panelists. And this has come up a little bit already, but what are your assessments for the long-term recovery, and how long do you think your organizations are going to be on the ground to support, and what are the financial resources that are going to be required to allow you to achieve that, unless you're going to have to pack up and leave early?
Well, sure. From the Louisiana VOAD perspective, a lot of our member organizations are Louisiana based and are on the ground. So we were already here and we're going to continue to be here. But the national partners who come in to help us, the Red Crosses, the Team Rubicons, the SBPs, the other organizations that are more national that come in, you know, SBP's here already. But the key for them is how long can they stay to help us? Food banks do what we do. We do it. We're on the ground every day. We just expand what we do and go as long as we can till we run out of money and food. The problem's going to be the long-term recovery, and do we have the funds? Do we have the support to help so many individuals who need assistance get to the point that they can say, we're back, we're home, everything's fine now, we can move on with our lives and really be recovered, if you will.
Yeah. April?
Yeah, so part of our assessments are continuing and ongoing. Part of that is the detailed damage assessment that really helps a lot of the other organizations that do really long-term, longer-term recovery operations to better understand what's going on within the community. You know, this week we're starting our accelerated individual assistance program for hotel evacuees that are eligible for that. And then later in September, we'll be doing our shelter resident transition program, which really assesses those needs and barriers to transitioning back to recovery for a number of folks. For the longer term recovery, it's looking at when resources allow. And so recognizing that our response costs are estimated at more than 20 million at this point, and we've been able to raise about 12 million. A lot of those longer term recovery aspects of our work at the Red Cross are defined by when our resources allow us to do so. But we're ensuring that we're alleviating suffering in that emergency phase and making sure that emergency assistance is provided now, looking towards the future in collaboration with our partners for longer term recovery.
That's great. And then Dana, I know you said you're looking at next week packing up, but any comments on that, and how many volunteers do you need to complete?
We historically, and we still maintain our mission of a relief organization. So we're on the ground. For this particular storm, we were on the ground quite quickly, probably before most storms. And we did have the issues with the potable water, the infrastructure that we dealt with, and Verizon had helped us with that. As we move forward, a hard date or hard stop is around the 18th, which is next Friday. We'll provide meals as long as the need assessments are coming in. We do have our food order phone where any organization or individual can call in and order meals the day before. We'll make sure that we have that available, those food ready for them. As far as resources, this size deployment, we usually run with about 75 to 100 volunteers daily. We have been doing it with 20. We've been doing it with 20 volunteers with 8 leadership on the ground. So we've been rotating. We usually will give them 4 days on and then they leave, but we've been giving them 1 or 2 days, and the real strong-headed volunteers that have a passion through the roof, they've been showing back up to the site before we can tell them to go home. So it's difficult in itself, but they're driven. Financial, always like any nonprofit. We do crowdsource funding, we do private donations, Facebook, all that. And we raised a little over 100,000, but this deployment will cost us probably about $1.5 to $2 million.
Yeah.
So that always helps.
Zach, give you the last word on the panel before we go to questions.
Thanks. Yeah. So SBP will be in it until the recovery is complete. That's what we do. We're in Baton Rouge for 4 years. We're still in New York and New Jersey and South Carolina and Texas and Puerto Rico and the Bahamas. So we'll be there until the recovery is complete. We have set the target for over 2 years to do 250 homes is just over $3 million. We're not anywhere close to it yet. But we're so thankful for the partners in these tight times who have really generously invested and done more than traditionally. Walmart's been exceptional. Farmers has been exceptional. AT&T and UPS. A nice number came in from Hilti. We're going to have to raise more money locally, but we really do hope for the corporate philanthropists who are out there when you're planning your 2021 budgets, which we know are now, that you focus on long-term recovery. We do believe the federal dollars are going to get here and on the ground in a couple of years, but we've got to bridge that gap between now and a couple of years. Otherwise, these hardworking, salt of the earth American families are going to be pushed beyond their breaking point. They're close. You saw it with that woman. If we can add predictability and a clear path forward, and that's what SPP does, we think we can make a great difference. And Brooks, I'll share with you, I'm sure Elizabeth already has, our relay race video, and that may just be illustrative or instructive for some of the folks out there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we'll definitely share that with all of the attendees. So thank you all so much for being on here. We really thank all of the efforts and all the work that you're doing on top of the first responders and emergency management officials and all the organizations who are on the ground. So really appreciate everything everyone is doing. So we do have just a few minutes left for questions. So please continue to put them into the chat box and we can get those over to the panel. As a reminder, for those of you who I think have joined our calls in the past and are familiar with our corporate aid tracker, we are looking at how companies are giving towards both Hurricane Laura and the California wildfires. And so if you have made a donation, please share that with myself at bnelson@uschamber.com, or also Will Powell at WPOWELL@uschamber.com. And so, Dr. Calavata, actually, if we can go to you with the first question, staying with kind of this long-term recovery and the department's engagement with FEMA, can you share a little bit more about the outlook and the collaboration from that standpoint?
Well, we deal with both Federal Highway Administration and with FEMA, both. FEMA now covers all of the debris collection and disposal for not only state facilities, but also for local facilities. However, the damages that occur to transportation infrastructure, they're broken into two types of infrastructure. One is infrastructure that's eligible for federal aid, and infrastructure that's not. Generally, neighborhood streets and things like that are not eligible for federal aid through the Federal Highway Administration. So that's all handled by FEMA, and we work with FEMA. We have a number of those roadways on the state highway system, and we also assist local governments if they needed in writing these project worksheets for FEMA to repair that damage and get reimbursed for it. For federal highway reimbursement, those are for the more major roadways, interstates, and some of the major highways. We have to do a damage inspection report on that, a DIR, and we submit those and receive reimbursement for 80% of the funding that we spend. FEMA has two cost categories they use. If you initially, it's a 75-25 split, where they put up 75% of the money, and the non-federal party has to put up 25%. But if you reach a certain threshold, which we certainly will in this event because of the magnitude of it, it becomes a 90-10 split. So the state will provide the 10%, FEMA will provide the 90%, and local governments for their public infrastructure that needs repair will also have to provide the 10% match for that. Although depending on how the state legislature, if they want to allocate funds for that to assist local governments, they may very well do that. And we try to lend expertise to people to help them through that process. But there is just a tremendous amount of debris out there that has to be dealt with. And, the damage to even some of the water infrastructure, as I understand it, when some of these trees came out of the ground, pulled the water pipes out with them. So we've got all these breaks in the water system all over the place. And, most people in our country take running water for granted, that it's just, turn on the faucet, here comes clean water. And when you don't have that, I mean, you can't do anything without water. And so not having water or sewer services is just a very difficult to deal with. And then having power outages on top of that is just horrible. So we're going to do the best we can to work with getting the debris cleared off the side of the roadways. People will bring things from their yards and homes out to the side of the road. We will make 3 passes. FEMA reimburses for up to 3 passes for debris removal. We will do that and dispose of all that debris. We have contracts in place to private contractors to do that, and people will move debris to the edge of the roadway, and we'll pick that up and remove it and dispose of it appropriately. And that'll be a big help, I think. But a lot of this is going to come down to volunteers helping people. And a lot of us have done that in the past in other disasters, because insurance will only cover so much, and then FEMA assistance will only cover so much, and then it just takes a lot of sweat and hard work to help people get their lives back together and get their homes repaired. And we may not all be the best carpenters in the world or painters or what have you, but look, when you volunteer and you help and you do things and you get people back in their homes, and that's as Zach was mentioning, your home is your refuge from the world. I mean, it's just absolutely critical you get back in there and get your family back in there. And so in some cases, we may need temporary trailers for people to live in on their property right next to their house so they can work on their house and have utilities hooked up to those trailers where they can have a place to live and sleep and bathe and eat such and be able to work on their home. So anyway, we're going to do what we can, and we've got people from all over the state. All of our workers from the other parts of the state, we've got them in there working right now. Of course, it's difficult because you got to house them, you got to feed them, and there's no place to stay in that part of the state. The hotels aren't open. There's no food places open. It's difficult even to find a place to go to the bathroom. So it's a real issue right now, and it's going to take a while to work through it, but we're gonna stick with it till it's done.
That's great. And can you remind everyone how many people are without power currently?
The last count I had is 120,000.
Okay.
That's how many housing units or buildings that don't have power. It may be multiple people affected. Yeah. So, and the number of people that I've mentioned earlier, the 17,630 to be exact, of people that the state is helping to shelter, that's only a fraction of the people that are actually being sheltered elsewhere. Many people evacuated on their own, got their own hotel room, or they're staying with family members and in other parts of the state or in other states. In Texas, for example, I'm sure there's many people took refuge with family members in Texas as well. So it's just a fraction of the total number of people that are really in desperate need to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Kalavata and April, Mike, Zach, and Dana for being on. Really appreciate it. For those on the call, we do have the reference list on our website with the organizations that are on the ground, which includes all of our speakers from today. And if you are looking for any additional assistance, please feel free to reach out to me directly at bnelson@uschamber.com. And again, thank you to Coca-Cola and the Disaster Action Alliance, FedEx, the Medtronic Foundation, Prudential Shell Oil Company, and the UPS Foundation, who made this call possible. So thank you all for joining. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and stay safe.
Thank you, Brooke.